We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Vav Amud Aleph in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 66a. The Gemara here continues Achvasa that Pazi and Tavi, they were twin sisters, and they were the daughters of Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia had both twin sons and twin daughters. And the Gemara continues, Velo Mifkadi, but is it really true that women are not commanded in the mitzvah of Puru Revu? V'yamar Rav Acha bar Rav Katina Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Acha bar Rav Katina said in the name of Rav Yitzchak, Ma'isa be'isha achas shechetzia shivcha v'chetzia bas chorin. There was a story with a woman, she was half slave and she was half free, half shivcha, half bas chorin. V'kavu es rabba v'asa bas chorin. And they forced the master to make her completely free. Rashi over here says, V'asa bas chorin kidei shetei muteres linase, in order that she can get married. The problem was, since she was a half slave and half free, she couldn't marry anybody. So they forced the master to make her fully free so that she could get married. Now, for forcing the master, that sounds like she's commanded in Pru Uravu. Why else would we force the master to free her? And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Minog hefker nagu ba. No, it was a totally different story over there. It wasn't because of Pru Ravu. The reason why they forced the master to free her was because she was acting in a way of hefkerus. She was with many men. As Rashi over here says, Minog hefker nagu ba. They treated her in a way of hefker. Since she couldn't get married, atzma. She made herself free to all men. And there were all kinds of sins involved with her. That's why it says over here, Kafu es Rabba v'asa bas chorin. They forced her master to free her. It was for that reason. Hadron aloch habal Yevamto. We will return to you parak habal Yevamto. That is the end of the 6th parak of Mesechet Yevamos. We will now begin the 7th parak of Mesechet Yevamos. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And please take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And the Mishnah says, Almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot. Let's say you have a situation of an almana who marries a kohen gadol. That's a forbidden relationship. Or a grusha and chalutza marries a kohen hedyot. That is also a forbidden relationship. So the Mishnah says, Hichniso lo avdei melug va'avdei tzon barzel. Let's say the wife, she brings into the marriage avdei melug and avdei tzon barzel, servants who have melug status and servants who have tzon barzel status. That will be explained in Rashi. So the halacha is avdei melug lo yochlu b'truma. The servants who are melug, they cannot eat truma. Avdei tzon barzel yochlu, but the servants that are tzon barzel, they're allowed to eat truma. And Rashi over here explains, Masha isha machneses labala, v'shamalo lekablam olav ba'achrayas ksubasa, kimosha kosvin, v'don nedunya danola slave, whom mosif kenegdan v'chosif sach hakol kibalala ploni kach v'kach b'ksubasa. Basically, it means, let's say the woman brings property into the marriage, and they write that property, they evaluate it in the ksuba, they say what it's worth. Korin son barzel, that's called son barzel. The idea is that should that marriage end, let's say he divorces her, for example, he's going to have to give her that exact evaluation, whatever that amount of money that property was worth, that's what he has to give her. So in such a situation, the achrayus of that property really is on the husband. In other words, if the property goes down in value, he takes the loss. If the property goes up in value, then he takes the gain. He always has to return to her what it was worth at the time of the marriage. That's what's called son barzel. So the servants that are son barzel are really fully under the achrayus of the husband. Now sometimes it's not all written in the ksuba. She leaves it over for herself, so to speak. That's called property of melug. In that case, the husband, let's say it's land, so the husband will get the fruits from the land. But she'll get the actual land itself. In that case, it's the other way around. If the value of, let's say, the property goes down, she takes the loss. If it goes up, then she takes the gain. Lashon son barzel keren kayam shein poches v'nifsad shafilu mesu kulan acharayusan olav l'shalim lo k'shiyamos o yigarshena. The language of son barzel, it's like iron, means the value always stays the same. It doesn't make a difference. He always owes her that amount. So then the Mishnah said that the distinction is going to be as follows: that avdei melug lo yochlu, the avdei melug, so they're not going to be allowed to eat the truma, but the avdei son barzel are lefi shehein shalav hi chalala. The reason is as follows: the avdei melug really belong to her, and she's a chalala because this is a forbidden marriage. She's an almana marrying a kohen gadol. She's a grusha v'chalutza marrying a kohen hedyot. So therefore, since they belong to her and she's a chalala, they're disqualified. The Gemara is going to explain exactly later on the reasoning behind all of this, but that's the basic idea. So again, hichnisalo avdei melug va'avdei tzon barzel. She brings into the marriage servants of melug and servants who are tzon barzel. So avdei melug lo yochlu b'truma. The avdei melug, that's really under her domain. That's her property, so to speak. So those servants cannot eat truma because again she's a chalala. But avdei tzon barzel yochlu. But the avdei tzon barzel, they're allowed to eat the truma because they really belong to the husband, or at the very least, the acharayus is fully on the husband for the avdei tzon barzel. The elu hein avdei melug, and the Mishnah now explains what's avdei melug. In mesu lav, in hosiru law, like we just explained. If they die, it's her loss. If they gain in value, then it's her gain. Now, even though he's chayev to provide the mezonos, the husband has to provide the food for these avodim. But they cannot eat truma in this case again, as we just explained. Now, what is the avdei tzon barzel? Also, as Rashi explained, and mesu lo, if they die, then it's going to be his loss. Vim hosiru lo, and if there's a gain in value, it's going to be his gain, because again, he only owes her the value they were at the time they entered the marriage. So hoel v'chayev achrayus, and since he's chayev and achrayus, he's responsible for any losses that take place. Harei elu yochlu b'truma. So in that case, they're allowed to eat the truma. And the Mishnah continues, Bas Yisrael shenisis l'kohen. Let's say you have a Bas Yisrael who marries a Kohen, so she's trying to be entitled to truma based on her marriage to the Kohen. V'hechnisa lo avodim, and then she brings in avodim into the marriage. So bein avdei melug, bein avdei tzon barzel, doesn't matter what kind of servants they are, whether they're melug, whether they're tzon barzel. Harei elu yochlu b'truma. They're going to be able to eat the truma. Rashi over here says, Bas Yisrael shenisis l'kohen, afilu avdei melug she'enan shalo yochlu. Even avdei melug, which really don't belong to him, they really belong to her, they can also eat truma. Dahainu kinyano shekana kinyan, because it's like as if his kinyan acquired something else, meaning she is the kinyan of her husband, but she's then acquired servants. So it's a kinyan of a kinyan, but they also get v'alfinan b'gemara the kinyano shekana kinyan ocha. We learn out of the Gemara that if his kinyan acquires a kinyan, that kinyan also gets to eat truma. So that's why it's saying it doesn't matter if it's avdei malug or avdei tzon barzel, they get to eat truma. And the Mishnah continues, Ubas Kohen shenisis li Yisrael. Let's say it's the daughter of a Kohen, and she marries a Yisrael. V'echnisa lo avodim, and she brings avodim into the marriage. So bein avdei melug, bein avdei tzon barzel, there it doesn't make a difference either. It doesn't matter if they're avdei melug, it doesn't matter if they're avdei tzon barzel. Harei elu lo yochlu b'truma, they do not eat truma. And again, in this case, she was the daughter of a Kohen, but now she's marrying a Yisrael. She's not entitled to the truma, and therefore the avodim as well, they're not going to be entitled to the truma. And the Gemara says, "V'avdei melug lo yochlu b'truma." These avdei melug, they don't get to eat truma again in this situation where you have, let's say, almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot. Those avdei melug that are her acquisitions, they should be able to eat truma. Why are they not eating truma? Amai, why? Lahavi kinyano shekana kinyan. It should be no different than any time his kinyan acquires another kinyan. She's the kinyan of the husband, and then she has these avodim. The avodim are her kinyan, so therefore they should get truma. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, minayin l'kohen shenasa isha. How do we know that a Kohen who marries a woman, v'kana avodim, or a Kohen who acquires servants, sheyochlu b'truma, how do we know they eat truma? Shenemar, like the pasuk says, v'kohen ki yikna nefesh kinyan kaspu hu yochal bo. The kinyanim of the Kohen can eat truma. Uminayin leisha shekansa avodim, and how do we know? Let's say the wife acquires her own servants, v'avodav shekanu avodim, or let's say his servants acquire servants, sheyochlu b'truma. How do we know they eat truma? Shenemar, like the pasuk says, v'kohen ki yikna nefesh kinyan kaspu hu yochal bo, and it means to say kinyano shekana kinyan ochel. If his kinyan acquires something, that kinyan also gets to eat truma. So again, over here, why should the avdei melug not get truma? And so the Gemara answers, Kol ha'ochel maichil. The Gemara answers, anyone who they themselves is able to eat truma, they can cause others to eat. But Kol she'ein ochel eino maichil. But if they can't eat the truma, they can't cause others. In other words, since this was a forbidden relationship, the almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot, so as we said, she's a chalola, she can't have truma. So therefore, her acquisitions also cannot have truma. But the Gemara says velo, but is that really true? Do we have such a rule that if you're not eino ochel, then eino machil, they're not allowed to have truma? V'harei orel v'chol atameim she'einon ochlim u'machilim. What about, let's say you have an orel, or let's say you have people who are tamei, they're not allowed to have truma, but they can cause others to have truma. And the Gemara says no, that's totally different. Hasam pumayu koivlu, over there their mouths are aching for them. In other words, it's a temporary thing. Somebody who's an orel, who doesn't have a bris milah, or somebody who's tamei, so those people, they correct that issue, they're going to be able to have truma. So therefore, their acquisitions are still able to have truma. But the Gemara continues, Vare mamzer, but what about a situation of a mamzer? She'ein ochel u'maichel, a mamzer also doesn't eat truma, but he can cause others to eat truma. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Ha'orel, first of all, talked about a fact you have an orel or a tameh, so then if they acquire avodim, those avodim are allowed to have truma, even though they can't have truma. Kohen orel eino ochel va'avodav ochel. You have a kohen who's an orel, he doesn't eat truma, and the servants do eat. Kedetanan l'kamon, that's a Mishnah later on. And so the Gemara answered for that, pumayu koivlu, that's a prevention that can be fixed. Kilomar mechusrei takon. In other words, their mouths are aching, meaning there's a takana there that can happen. Aval omdim lisakin v'lachol, they can become pure, they can get a bris milah, they can have truma. Aval zushi nasis chalala ein latikon olamis. But over here, you have almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hediot, the status of a chalala she has, so that's never going to be fixed. She'll never have truma, so that's a whole different situation. Her acquisitions are not allowed to have truma. But then the Gemara said, okay, but what about mamzer, vare mamzer? Now the case is as follows, Rashi says. Bas Yisrael shenisas l'kohen. You have a Bas Yisrael, she marries a Kohen. On account of the Kohen, she can have truma. V'yolda Bas, she gives birth to a daughter. V'habas nisas l'mamzer. The case is that the daughter then marries a mamzer. V'yolda ben, they have a son. So now this Bas Yisrael has a grandson who's a mamzer. V'mesa, and then she dies. V'haben kayim, in other words, the daughter dies, but that son is still alive. So the only descendant that this Bas Yisrael has is this grandson who's a mamzer. Now the halacha is the grandmother can now eat truma because of this descendant of hers, this grandson that's a mamzer, even after her husband dies. Because the general rule is if you have children from the Kohen, on account of the children, while the husband's alive, of course she could have truma. But when her husband dies, but she's got this grandson, she has children through that husband, this grandchild, that also entitles her to truma. Now in this particular case, we have to have a case where he, meaning the mamzer, doesn't have truma. Now that's true over here. This mamzer is not going to get truma because he's not a Kohen. The case over here was, again, it was her daughter that ended up marrying a mamzer and they had a child. So this now this grandson mamzer is not a Kohen. He's a zar. He obviously can't have truma, but on account of him, she can eat truma. So that's what we're seeing over here, that a mamzer she'ein ochel can cause that the grandmother can eat. Now Rashi points out, nami kosher have. You don't even need to have a case of a mamzer. Let's say he wasn't a mamzer. It would be the same thing. Shenolad mi Yisrael, kosher nami, ein ochel umachel. You have the same exact case. Let's say her daughter would have married a Yisrael kosher, and they had a child who was now, again, not a Kohen, but not a mamzer either. So he can't eat truma. He'd cause her to eat. You could have brought that proof. His grandmother could eat. The only reason we're bringing mamzer is because mamzer is a case that happens to be mentioned in the Mishnah, but you really could have brought a different case as well. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Ravina says, Kinyan ochel ka'amar. When we're talking about the fact that somebody who's ein ochel can't be meichel, that's talking specifically about someone who is a kinyan, someone who is an acquisition. It wouldn't apply over here to a case, let's say, of a grandson, where the reason you're eating, where the reason the mother is, let's say the grandmother is eating, is because she has a child. That's a completely different case. And Ravina explains, Kinyan ochel meichel. If you have a kinyan, an acquisition that can eat, again, a situation, let's say, of a wife of a Kohen, so she's the kinyan of the Kohen. If she can eat, then meichel, then she can cause others, her servants, to be able to eat as well. She'eno ochel, but if that kinyan is not able to eat truma, eino meichel, she can't cause others to eat as well. So that's how you understand over here why we say that in this particular case, the avdei melug are not allowed to have truma. And the Gemara continues, V'Rava Amar, and Rava says another explanation why the avdei melug, meaning her servants, are not allowed to have truma. Midoraisa mechal achli. Actually, according to Rava, on a doraisa level, they really are entitled to truma because, again, they're the acquisition of the acquisition. They should get truma. V'Rabbanan hu degazribu. But according to Rava, it's just a gezer midrabbanan why they cannot have truma. Kedei shetomer. The reason is so that she should say to herself, Ani eini ochelas. I'm not allowed to eat truma. Avdei einan ochlin. My servants aren't allowed to eat truma. Zona hi etzlo she, meaning herself. I am like a zona to him. I'm not an appropriate wife for him. Hilka chasi lafuka. And through that, it's going to end up that it's going to cause that he's going to divorce her. In other words, we want to encourage this marriage to end, and a good way to encourage this marriage to end is not to allow the avodim to have truma. And the Gemara continues, Rav Ashi says another reason why her avdei melug are not allowed to have the truma, gezerah shematachil achar misa, because we have a gezerah, maybe her husband's going to die, and at that point the servants certainly are not entitled to truma, because again, she's a chalala right now, she can't have truma, and certainly they can't have truma when her husband dies, but we're afraid they're going to continue to eat the truma after the husband dies, and that's why we don't allow them to have truma. truma. But the Gemara says, Ela me'ata, but according to that logic, Bas Yisrael shenisas l'kohen. Let's say you have a regular Bas Yisrael that marries a Kohen, lo tachil, her servants should not be able to eat truma for the same reason. We should say, Gezerah shematachil, achar misa. We should say there's a Gezerah that the Kohen's going to die, and then the Avodim are going to continue to eat truma because they're going to think, what's the difference? We're really the servants of the Bas Yisrael, and we were eating truma before, and we're still the servants of the Bas Yisrael, and we should continue to eat truma. So we should always make a Gezerah according to that logic. And so the Gemara says, Elo Amar Rav Ashi, rather Rav Ashi says, Be'almona kohenes, when we make the Gezerah, it's really due to the situation, let's say in the case of Almona l'Kohen Gadol, where she was a Kohenes. She herself was a Kohen, so to speak. She was the daughter of a Kohen before she ever married the Kohen Gadol. Ta'asyu lo roi, because in that case, she's going to come and she's going to rationalize as follows. She'll say, Meikara achli b'truma debei nasha. Originally, my servants, these Avdei Milug, they were eating truma on account of my father's household. In Sevile lahai achli b'truma de gavroi. Now I got married to this Kohen Gadol, and they're continuing to eat on account of my husband. V'hashta hadri li lemilsa kamaisa. And now it should go back to what it originally was, and my servants should be able to continue to eat truma. V'lo yada, and she doesn't know, she doesn't realize, to make kara lo shavisi lenafshe chalala, that originally she wasn't a chalala. Hashta shavisi lenafshe chalala, but now through this marriage, she made herself a chalala, but she's not going to recognize that fact, and that's why we say her avdei milug cannot have truma. And so the Gemara says, Teinach almona kohenes. So I understand this makes sense by an almona who's a kohenes. She'll rationalize, and therefore we have to say her avdei milug can't have truma. But almona bas Yisrael ma'ikol amemer. But let's say she's an almona who happens to be a bas Yisrael. There's no rationalization. So what do you say over there? Over there we should say that her avdei milug should, again, they should be able to have truma while she's married to this Kohen. And the Gemara answers, Bal menusa lo pligi rabbanan. When it comes to almonas, since it's going to get confusing, so the rabbanan didn't make any distinctions, and they said in any situations like this, we're going to say that there's a gezerah, and the avdei milug cannot have truma. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was learned, hamachneses shum lebala. Let's say a woman brings into the marriage nichsei tzon barzel. It's called shum because, again, it's evaluated. We figure out what it's worth monetarily, and we place that value, we write that value into the ksuba. And as we said, by nichsei tzon barzel, she's always going to get back that monetary value at the end of the marriage. Let's say there's a divorce, and any gains or any losses are going to be upon the husband. But now at the end of the marriage, he omeres kliani notelas. She says, look, I want the actual vessel, meaning I want the actual item. Now, as the Gemara is going to say later, let's say the item went up in value, she's going to have to pay that difference, and let's say it went down in value, of course, he's going to absorb the loss, but she wants the actual item. V'omer damimani nosen, and he says, no, I just want to give you the value. I'm not interested in giving you the item. I want to give you exactly what it was worth at the time of the marriage. So hadin immi, so who is correct in this situation? Does she get the kli, or is he able to just give the damim? Rav Yehuda Amar, Rav Yehuda says, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Vav Amud Beis.